Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about animal rescues, animal protection, animal cruelty, with my guest, Janelle Babington. She is the founder and chief vision officer of Animal Victory. Previously, she managed commercial operations and retail stores. Then she began dealing with our animal issues by creating the American Red Lion Disaster and Abuse Fund, and eventually Animal Victory and Animal Victory Fund. She was nominated in 2018 as Wilmington's, that's in North Carolina, Wilma Magazine Women to Watch. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Hello, Nancy. Honored to be talking to you.
I have been following your work for many years, especially since about 2015 when you created your organization Animal Victory, because you basically are on that mission to make a better world for all animals. You've got the compassion to do so. Why did you form your own organization when there's so many other animal groups out there trying to save both our domesticated animals and our wildlife?
Nancy, that's a great question. That's part of the reason why I was glad to be on your show to discuss this. First off, I've got passion. There's about probably 25 to 30,000 animal welfare/rights organizations in the United States alone. When I started in 2015, it wasn't a nonprofit. It definitely wasn't some big business plan. It all started with, I don't know if you remember Cecil the lion that was killed in Zimbabwe. The whole world reacted at that point. The American dentist who went on a trophy hunting exhibition.
And we should point out that that was a lion that had been under research by scientists, but it made the mistake of leaving the protected national park, crossing over into a private reserve where it could be killed. It didn't know the boundaries.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can go on and on about that talk, and I agree with you. Cecil was tracked by London University for research. Right, the lion crossed over, the lion was killed, and regardless of the semantics, the way that the business got started was a result of Cecil the lion, what I wanted to focus on. So when Cecil was killed in Zimbabwe by the American dentists, the whole world reacted. They were outraged, not understanding the semantics, as you pointed out, but me included. And at that time, I remember thinking, and I didn't know the semantics at the time, I just knew a lion was killed. I love animals. I want to do something. So I remember thinking at the time, I want to donate. I want to help. Someone must be collecting funds for the people that actually are doing the work. I had no idea who Cecil was. I just knew a lion was killed, which is down to the emotional factor of animal lovers and donating. Regardless, so I remember Cecil was killed, and I remember going online. I was working. I didn't have a lot of time. I just wanted to donate $5. I couldn't find one single small organization collecting donations for Cecil, and I'm thinking, what's wrong? What's wrong with this problem? Why can't I find anybody collecting? I didn't even know what I wanted to do with the $5. I just wanted to give it to somebody who was helping, and that's pretty much the crux of donating when it comes to animals anyway. People just want to give the money to a trustworthy organization. They want somebody to solve the problem. It's emotionally based, and I was in that category at that time.
You are a perfect example of how one story, one connection to one animal moved you into becoming an animal activist for many different animals. And as you say, you don't have a lot of money, but every dollar counts when it comes to environmental and animal actions.
Absolutely. Your initial question is, why am I doing this when there's so many charities out there? And I'm going to hope to bottom line that by the end of the show for you. So it began with Cecil the lion, my passion. I was working in animal rescue prior to that for 10 years, but circumstances, and I loved it, and I learned everything I needed to learn about animal rescue and the dynamics. Fast forwarding, 2015 comes along, Cecil the lion comes along. I'm working in commercial real estate. This donation issue comes up, and I'm thinking, why can't I give $5 away? I'm literally trying to hand it to somebody, and nobody wants to take it. So then I learned that Jimmy Kimmel was on TV, and he had raised like $750,000 $30,000 overnight for the research institute that was tracking Cecil. And that's when something clicked for me. I'm thinking, how do these rescues make money when they're not asking for it? All right? I realized the money was there because Jimmy Kimmel collected it, and obviously the compassion was there. But what was missing is the bridge between the donors and the small organizations that needed help. And that's when it all began for me. I started digging and researching, and what I found changed everything. In a nutshell, the small, credible, sustainable, as I dub it, organizations, they have the passion, but they don't have the platform or the business skills to sustain themselves. And they're the ones doing all the hard work. I know because I did it for 10 years. They're financially drowning.
Let's make a point that it's often throughout the country and the world, the small local organizations that are doing the actual animal rescues, that are finding that dog or cat or farm animal that needs help and taking it in and giving it a home and taking care of it. It's the local people.
Oh, without question, and I'm going to get to that. And you can have all the passion in the world, but without the funding, which is what I'll get to, nothing's going to change. So going back to what I was mentioning, so I learned that, you've got all these, there's about 25, 30,000, by the way, give or take approximately. I started researching about 25 to 30,000 animal welfare/rights organizations in the U.S. alone. So as I started researching, I was looking up finances and dollars donated, and I was really bothered by this. I researched everything, and at some point I learned that the top 1 to 5% of the animal-related organizations were receiving the overwhelming majority of all donations. So here I am looking at the numbers thinking, how on earth are millions of animals supposed to be saved, or how are we going to solve these problems if only the largest organizations survive? If we've got 25 to 30,000 organizations in the U.S. alone working boots on the ground in all areas of the United States, and I stick to the United States. Of course, we donate globally, we work globally, but our niche is within the United States because that's where we're most effective, Nancy. It's very hard to reach the prime ministers, or it's very hard to reach the targets in the U.S., let alone out of the country.
You're working in your own community in Wilmington, North Carolina. How many animals have to be rescued there, and why?
Well, I'm not working in Wilmington. I'm working throughout the United States. Everything we do is behind the scenes. But if you want a clearer answer regarding Wilmington and the surrounding areas alone, there's probably about 300 animal rescue organizations. That's just give or take. So everything with me is going to be approximate here, okay? So bear with me. So moving back to how I got started, I realized help was needed for all of them, all of these 25, 30,000 in the U.S., and not just the top percent. Anyway, it was the moment with Cecil that was the spark that eventually led me into the world I am now. I'd like to talk about funding next and why the system is broken. So I'm starting with the funding issue before I even talk about abuse, because funding, once again, is at the core of everything.
But before we talk about funding, we have to have a clear idea of what those dollars do. How do they help? Are they paying for food in rescue centers and shelters? Are they paying for staff to go out and find abuse and rescue an animal? What is the money being used for? What is the real cause that needs to be done here in the United States?
All right. I follow the Giving USA, and they're the longest running. They report on charitable giving in the U.S. in all major categories, and best for me to follow for animal welfare. So if you have 25 to 30,000 organizations in the U.S., you've got all these different organizations working within their communities, and they all have their own philosophy. And of course, we'd like to believe that the bottom line is the same. They want animals, my vision, at the end of the day, to be respected and treated kindly. So you've got all these different organizations, and it's great that they're all working singularly in their own local communications, but it's not going to solve the problem unless you start banding together and unless we solve the funding problem. And I'll tell you what I learned about the funding problem. The funds, again, are at the core of everything. You can have all the passion in the world and do all the work you want to do, but if you don't have the sustainability or the ability to make money, you're not going to be able to sustain. So when we talk about the funding, and I go back to Giving USA is where I track my numbers, the statistics and the numbers have remained the same over the years since 2015, but the dollars have increased in total donations since then. So, for example, Americans donated approximately $592 billion last year to all categories, okay? Animals receive about 7.7% of the $592 billion. And when I say animals, that means let's combine all 30,000 organizations.
When we're talking about animals in this sense, we're talking mainly about domesticated animals. We're not talking about saving ecosystems and preserving areas in natural habitats for wildlife. There are really two kind of different animal groups. The ones working to save individual wildlife that's on the endangered species list or could be on the endangered species list versus the domesticated animals that are in people's homes or on farms.
Yeah, correct. And I should clarify that. When it comes to animals, the 7.7 of the $592 billion, that number is shared with the environmental causes, okay?
So that is really very, very little of what is needed.
Very little.
And have researchers study the wildlife, to have people go out and create the sanctuaries for rescued animals, the shelters. I know here in Los Angeles, there's a major problem because the shelters are full of animals. And unfortunately, not all the shelters are no-kill animals because they run out of space.
Absolutely, absolutely. So moving back to the funding, Nancy, animals maybe get 18. Animals, first of all, they don't even have their own category. That tells you how low they are on the list, okay? They have to share it with the environment. Now, how important is the environment and animals? They should both be separated and have their own categories, but they don't. They're lumped together for a lot of obvious reasons, as you mentioned, but regardless, they're two of the most pressing issues that society faces today, I believe. So if you do the math, going back to that $592 billion, approximately $18.2 billion, this is from 2024, goes to the environment and animals. So let's say 50-50 split, $9.1 billion goes to the animals. So if you have 30,000 animal rescue/rights orgs in the U.S., let's just stick with the rescues and the rights. Let's not get into the environmental part for the sake of simplicity right now, if you're okay with that. But almost all of that money, approximately 90% of that, goes straight to the top 1 to 5% of the organizations. Let's say about 1,500 organizations. So there's about $8.19 billion or $5 million-ish for each of those top organizations. And when I say the top organizations, I'm speaking of animal rescues and rights. I'm talking about the PETAs, Humane Society, ASPCA. Those are the top organizations I'm talking about. And they all do a fine job. Everybody has their own philosophy. Of course, I have my opinion. That's another story for another day. But everybody does great work for the animals. But the bottom line is you've got about $1.8 billion left that has to be shared by, let's say, 25,000 organizations, which amounts to about $73,000 per year for each of them. So that amount, when you ask what are they doing with the money, that amount is simply impossible for them to do their work. These are the organizations doing the heavy lifting. They're pulling the animals out of cruelty cases, bottle feeding the newborns, rescuing in disasters, treating the abused, abandoned, injured animals, saying yes to the animals nobody else wants. And they're dealing with the public, which is difficult enough, who doesn't understand the core issues of animal rescues.
You are certainly making a very important point that if people care about animals, want them to be taken care of in cruelty, rescue those in need, funding needs to be there. And I don't think most people are aware of where the money goes and to whom it goes. And you have certainly looked into this area and are trying to find some equity. I just saw a documentary based in Macedonia about farmers struggling to make a living, but it was in the village that has the most stork nests in all of Europe. It was quite moving to hear about the tale of Siljan, which apparently all storks are named, and seeing the farmers bury the storks that they find dead, but also how the storks are changing their pattern of not migrating because they've got landfill to eat out of all year instead of the farms. Basically, I found out that there's no organization trying to preserve and protect the storks, which made me wonder, maybe we don't have enough animal rights organizations to protect every animal. Do you agree?
Oh, without question, I agree. Again, animals are at the bottom of the list, Nancy. They don't even have their own category. If you were to go to any drop-down platform, I guarantee you, at least 80% of them, if you were dropping down the what are you interested in, you won't find animals. You'll find other. And if you do find animals, it would be lumped in with the environment. We need so much help. We need a revolution. I always call it, we need a mini George Floyd revolution to make things happen.
Please lead our revolution. You and I both read about stories of animals in need all the time, and an individual animal obviously moves us. I'm following the orangutans in Southeast Asia. I'm following elephant stories in Africa. But here in the United States, there are animals that really don't belong in captivity. It's like being in a cell. Dolphins in entertainment amusement parks that have been captured and living without their families for 50 years. Circus animals, from elephants to lions and other animals that have to perform non-traditional behaviors. Every time I read these stories, I get moved. I'm sure you get moved practically daily, too, as you read about them.
Absolutely. I wish I could name a few offhand. One that comes to mind might be a non-human rights organization. They're dealing with Happy, the Asian elephant who's been at the Bronx Zoo. That story, although I don't follow it closely enough, they're the people fighting for the animal rights. But the elephant stories break my heart. The elephants in chains break my heart. The tourists that take selfies with animals, it breaks my heart when I read about the baby sloths where people will steal the animals as infants and use them for commercial use. Not all sanctuaries are good, not all zoos are good, but they do have their purpose, and a lot of them are good. I'll probably read a story at least once a week where I think, oh boy, this is going on. But I'm comforted knowing that you do have some strong organizations out there working hard to handle these issues. There's so many different animal stories. And again, my biggest focus is on dogs and cats, Nancy. So that's what I kind of have to stick to, or my head will be all over the place. And what we do is just try to donate. What I try to do is just give the money away to these organizations that I know are making headway. Animal Legal Defense Fund is great. They're working with animal rights. And then, of course, the Non-Human Rights Organization, probably two of my favorite organizations out there, because they're the groups that are going to be able to take us to the next level if they succeed. So individual stories, they all break my heart. They all break my heart. I feel for all of them, and I can't really name one individually. I could name different cases, different petition cases, and some of the outcomes and the impacts we've had, where we've succeeded, where we've failed.
We are going to talk more about animals and protecting them and helping them with my guest, Janelle Babington, when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Janelle Babington. She is founder and chief vision officer of Animal Victory. It seems as though your organization is very focused on trying to get funding for animal rescue groups throughout the country, the smaller groups. How does a group like yours work with those local organizations?
All right, that's a great question. That is exactly the reason this is my calling in life, to get the funds into the hands of the small rescue organizations. I mentioned before I spent 10 years hand-on rescue. I love that work. It broke my heart daily. But I learned everything I needed to know about animal rescue. And I eventually realized my greatest impact wasn't going to be saving one animal at a time. It was going to be building a system that could support thousands. Moving forward with life as anything, the timing needed to be right for that to happen.
I am so happy you have that passion. If someone wants to get involved with your organization, what are some of the actions and information that they can find on your website, and what is your website?
Our website is animalvictory.org. We also have Animal Victory Fund. We've got a for-profit business and a nonprofit business. There's a lot of reasons why that all started. I actually started with a nonprofit initially. All of our work is done behind the scenes. We don't physically rescue animals. So we do have volunteers. They can just reach out to us in an email, info@animalvictory.org. Let us know what their skill set is. We are growing. It's probably one of my weaker points. Recruiting volunteers, I struggle with that a little bit, trying to get people in. People want to do what they want to do, Nancy, and most people want to work with the animals that contact us, and that's not what we do. But as we grow and we continue to grow, one of my goals is to try to recruit more volunteers to help us with these outreach programs and to expand Animal Victory.
There are many different ways that people can volunteer, the hands-on with local groups, actually touching an animal, or working in the organizational arena to try and develop programs and support the cause. These groups exist. Your group exists because, unfortunately, not everybody treats animals nicely. Animals are abused. There's a lot of cruelty out there. That's a whole nother area of education that is needed throughout the country so that we don't have to rescue the animals. We know that we have to sterilize animals so that there's not an animal overpopulation issue. People should not let their animals out so that they become feral, and that creates a problem for the wildlife. We know that people who are cruel to animals often become cruel to human beings. So there are a lot of reasons to have animals in our life because they are wonderful companions, but they have to be treated well. So you've got a mix of how that funding should be split, whether or not it should go to shelters, whether or not it should go to education programs, whether or not it should go to individual rescues. Obviously, all of those are issues that you have to tackle.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The biggest problem in animal welfare, here's the truth that we don't talk about enough. We have the manpower. We have the passion. We absolutely have the people willing to do the work, as you mentioned, and there's a lot of different causes and different needs for animals. But without the funding, what good is the manpower? You can have a heart of gold, you can be willing to work 18 hours a day, but without money for food, medicine, transport, supplies, your hands are tied. So the biggest problem in animal welfare isn't compassion or manpower, it's where the money goes. Those funds from the larger organizations, as I mentioned, that are going to the top 1% to 5%, they're not trickling down. So until we fix that, nothing else changes. And this is where Animal Victory steps in, okay? Because my whole focus is about making money so that I can give it away again. That's initially how I started. I couldn't stand it, and I thought, how are they surviving? Again, the Cecil impact, that moment where I thought, I'm giving away $5. Does anybody want it? Couldn't find it. So let's move on to why people abuse animals, one of the topics you mentioned, the real reasons. Well, I've learned, first of all, aside of the fact that animals don't have rights, which is number one, animal abuse, what I believe, falls into what I call the four big categories. First, you have neglect. That's the passive kind of abuse. Most abuse is actually neglect. And when I say most abuse, I want to clarify that our niche in Animal Victory is dogs and cats. Of course, we help all animals, but in business, if we want to be sustainable, and of course we need the funding ourselves to sustain our business, to be able to give the money away again, we had to narrow down our focus. So it's dogs and cats, although we will jump into farm animals, of course. But dogs and cats are our closest companions, and they're the number 1 and 2 most abused animals in that order. So I tend to focus a lot on dogs and cats for that reason alone. They are our closest companions to humans. When we go back to neglect, the passive abuse, most abuse is actually neglect. People are overwhelmed, they're broke, they're uneducated, indifferent. They simply shouldn't have an animal in the first place. It happens because they don't know the basics of care, they can't afford vet bills or food, life falls apart, eviction, illness, divorce, job loss. They didn't spay or neutered, they get overwhelmed, they lose interest, and the animal pays the price. So it may not start with bad intentions, but neglect is abuse, and it is the number 1 cause of animal abuse. Then we can move on to intentional cruelty. That's what we would dub active abuse, and that's a whole different universe. These are the people who hurt animals on purpose, and they're usually dealing with deep issues. These are people with mental illness, trauma, power and control, domestic violence, displaced aggression, thrill-seeking or sadism, and they're on the path toward more serious violence, and we know that violence, and we know this from decades of data. We all know that animal abuse is a precursor to domestic violence also.
There are definitely so many issues related to animals. It's important that we emphasize to people that they can take individual action, they can help local organizations, they can donate, but they can also take actions to write to elected officials, make sure that there are laws to protect the wildlife so that people don't take wildlife in as pets because they're not domesticated, that we also encourage people's behavior. There are a lot of animal organizations that are very active in promoting vegetarianism or veganism and not eating animals or animal products or using animal products. There are definitely much that an individual can do, and I assume that you are trying to encourage people to do that with educational programs and encouraging the organizations that you support to reach out and educate the people so that we don't have animal abuse and that we can enjoy our animals?
Oh, absolutely. Again, as I mentioned, there's 25 to 30,000 organizations, and of course we like to believe that they're all credible. There's a lot of rogue rescue organizations out there taking advantage of people, but there are so many great organizations with their own philosophies, veganism, supporting wildlife. Penny and I, my business partner, we're so very well connected with so many different charities throughout the United States. This was kind of our background. We both came in with good reputations when we started Animal Victory. In 2019 is when it was actually formed, and that's part of the reason we became successful. We both did have great reputations. We had good following base, and we were able to launch and keep improving improving and getting better and better. But there are so many wonderful organizations out there doing wonderful things. Going back to abuse, again, and what I call the four big categories, I mentioned neglect is the number one, intentional cruelty. But then you have the number two problem, overpopulation. And this is probably the biggest category, near and dear to my heart. Before I leave this world, I'll be damned if I'm not going to make a dent into this issue. In the U.S., we've got an estimated 70 million dogs and cats that are homeless at any given time. And about 6 to 8 million enter shelters each year, meaning most of these animals never find any help. Globally, those numbers are in the hundreds of millions. So when animals are not spayed or neutered, litters pile up, people become overwhelmed, leading to widespread neglect and abandonment. Overpopulation is the number two cause of animal abuse. You've got abandonment, surrender to shelters, dumping, hoarding situations, unintentional neglect from overwhelmed owners, and the downstream consequences. Homeless animals are struggling to survive. They're overcrowded in shelters. Shelters can't handle these animals. You've got higher euthanasia rates, and then you've got the public getting mad, trying to form these no-kill shelters, leaving animals in cages for years on end. That's not the solution. The solution is that there are simply too many dogs and cats and not enough good homes. We have to implement more funding for TNR, for trap, neuter, and release. If you're not familiar with that, we have to stop the population from growing, because that is the number two cause of abuse. Animals just end up starving, freezing to death, being neglected, being euthanized. It's a problem with no real solution in sight, and I really don't understand why it's taking so long and why government isn't more active, because it could solve a lot of these issues societal.
Is it cats or dogs, or is it sort of equal what the problem is?
In my opinion, without looking at the statistics and with looking at the statistics, it's mostly cats. Cats produce far more than dogs. I think you see a larger dog overpopulation in other countries, not so much in the United States. I mean, there are a lot of states, Texas for one, is bombarded with an overpopulation of abandoned dogs. In general, in the United States, I would have to believe it's cats mostly, okay, because cats reproduce at an alarming rate. One pair of cats could produce up to 450,000 cats and kittens, considering different variable statistics.
You call yourself the Chief Vision Officer of Animal Victory. What is your vision?
What is my vision? Well, here's my vision, Nancy. The solution, first of all, people need to band together. I always say animal welfare needs its own level cultural awakening, where we collectively say we're not going to handle this anymore. But that's not going to happen until we fix how the system works. I believe organizations have to work together. The funds need to start trickling down to those smaller, credible organizations who don't have a large platform to stand on. And that's what we do at Animal Victory. And we're a speck compared to these larger organizations, but we're growing and we're mighty. The truth is, these organizations, they don't really work together because they're terrified of losing donors. They have to stay in business, and rightfully so. So sharing donors is like risking the organization's life. But we have to fix the roots. Animal rights and population control. Everything comes back to those two foundational issues. Animals need legal rights. They can't be property anymore. Then the neglect and the intentional cruelty will slow down. And population control. Spay, neuter, education, and access must be everything. If you fix those two problems, half the problems disappear immediately. And then solution number three, which I believe the younger generation is going to finish where we leave off. They refuse cruelty. They question everything. They care. They won't tolerate violence, and hopefully they'll finish what we've started. So the solution starts with fixing funding, understanding why abuse happens, and then building the collective movement. And that's where I believe the next generation is going to be able to carry it across the finish line.
You mentioned the importance of giving animals rights. I know that there's an organization that's fighting to try and get rights to non-human species that are sentient, deserve to have rights. Some other countries have actually given animal rights to an orangutan, to a river, to trees, and other kinds of non-human entities. We can't really express how important it is to recognize that rights belong not just to humans, but to all life.
Absolutely, Nancy. And with my focus being on animals, until animals have rights, the abusers are going to be able to get away with a slap on the wrist, and that's what we fight for at Animal Victory. Stop dismissing these cases. And we are aware that animals don't have rights, but we fight. Outrage creates action, and that's where petitions come into play. They're like mini protests. So that's one half of our business, the animal petitions.
I am so pleased that you are passionate about taking care of animals and having a good life for them. Thank you so much for sharing that passion with us. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Nancy, for listening to me, for being able to air my grievances and be able to explain my opinion on what I believe is going out in the world and how we need to fix it.
You're welcome.
See, I'm glad you're out there speaking up for society and the environmental issues, as they do go hand in hand with animal organizations, and it's going to take an army. It's going to take a lot of educating and a lot of work. No easy task by any means, and hopefully the younger generation, as I mentioned, will finish off the job. They're pretty no-nonsense from what I see.
Absolutely. I have been speaking with Janelle Babington, who is the founder of Animal Victory. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.